Hello nerds and nerdettes, and welcome back to the channel where once again we have a new video for you guys. Today will be not a top 5 but rather a top 6, and that's because we will be going over my top 6 capes and cowls horror-centric stories to read in the month of October. 'Tis the season to read horror books or spooky books, but I already did that video, which maybe I can update at a later date. But now I want to give 6 books for my fans of superheroes to read if they mainly stick to superhero focused or superhero centric comics in Marvel and DC. The main reason that I made it 6 is so one publisher doesn't get 3 and the other one gets 2. I do want both to get 3 appearances in this list. So if you're a Marvel person or a DC person, you can kind of choose which ones you want to go towards when referencing this list. But before we get into the list and start with number 6, I am going to remind you guys that if you want any of the books I'm about to talk about, or you'd like to pre-order any of the new releases, to use the channel sponsor organicpricebooks.com. Use the discount code STAYNERDY for $2 off your order, or when ordering 3 or more books, you can use the code STAYNERDY, ship it together, to get 5% off that order. And for my manga lovers, I am a Right Stuff affiliate. So if you'd like to help support the channel when ordering from Right Stuff, you can go into the description and use my affiliate link. Both the affiliate link and the OPB code are great ways to support the channel, and every little bit counts. So thank you all for that. But without further ado, let's jump into the list. But actually, I do want to make a quick honorable mention, which is Deceased. I did feature Deceased in my previous October video, so I thought it would be a little bit unfair to mention this yet again in another list. But this is definitely my favorite Capes and Cowls horror-centric, horror-focused book. This is incredible. I highly recommend it. But let's go ahead and jump into the list, starting with number 6. The first entry for DC Comics is going to be DC versus Vampires. This is volume 1. There's 2 volumes out now in hardcover, and then there's also 2 volumes out of All Out War as well. I do recommend reading All Out War and DC versus Vampires, because if not, you could be a little lost when it pertains to some of the battles and some of the important segments during this story. So I do recommend reading both of those. But throughout this book is exactly what you're going to be getting, is what the title alludes to, which is DC superheroes going up against vampires. Very similar to that of the Deceased story, but what makes this that much more interesting is obviously vampires are much harder to pinpoint than a decaying rabid zombie, and they are much more cunning and much more creative, and you definitely get that throughout this series. You get a lot of instances where vampires or vampiric superheroes that are turned and you are unaware they are turned are kind of doing some maniacal things and playing their role that they need to play to fool the characters they need to fool. But it also shines a great light on a lot of the lesser known characters. For example, Green Arrow, who you see on the cover, he does play a good role, big role throughout this story as well. Really good stuff. This is all written by James Tynion, which he's no stranger to spooky stories at this point. I feel like that's kind of his wheelhouse at this point, but really good stuff. I do recommend reading both the All Out War and this. So you do have a lot of reading kind of if you want to dive into it, but it really is creative. It's a lot of fun. Keeps you looking over your shoulder and guessing who's vampire and who's not. And it's just creative overall and a nice way to play with superheroes and vampires. But that does wrap up DC versus Vampires, which is the first entry for DC Comics. And the first entry for Marvel Comics is Absolute Carnage. This omnibus, the Absolute Carnage omnibus, is out of print, but this entire event is collected in the Donny Cates Ryan Stegman omnibus. You might have an easier time finding that omnibus rather than this one. But the main reason I included this event on the list is mainly because of the character of Cletus Cassidy, who honestly, by nature, just at base form, is a very creepy and psychopathic an eerie character in general, but something does take place in the past which then affects him during this event. Obviously, I'm treading very lightly, where you almost have somewhat zombie-esque feelings to the story and the character, some of the characters, maybe more than one, maybe only one, who knows. But it definitely has that darker and grittier undertone. I would also probably include King in Black as well, just because Noel has kind of a creepy essence about him as well, with the long tongue and the hollowed black eyes. But I think Absolute Carnage just is a little bit more creepier, especially when it comes to their first initial kind of reaction to what he's doing, and the control he has over some characters and how they are handling that. But really good stuff here. Obviously, Donny Cates is doing the writing. You're going to have artwork from Ryan Stegman, but this pretty much collects all of the um, event as well as some of the tie-ins. So really good stuff, though. There's some creepy, creepy imagery, not only in this, but also King in Black. But I think this is just a little bit more digestible because it's not the size of King in Black, but you still get the same kind of feeling and essence. But in a lot of ways, this is kind of the prelude to King in Black. So if you do want to read that as well, you can put a little hyphen for King in Black as well if you want to do that. But that is Absolute Carnage, which is the first entry for Marvel Comics. So let's jump to the next DC Comics book. Next up for DC Comics is Batman and the Joker, the Deadly Duo. This is a team-up book. On the ground level, it's a team-up book between Batman and the Joker. But the main reason that I am including this on this list, that rhymes, is because of the henchman and the main villain that appears in this. I've mentioned before that there's a lot of notes that are very similar to that of I Am Legend, other than the more vampiric aspects of the, I guess, vampires in I Am Legend. But there's a lot of ways that I Am Legend kind of relates to this story, which is a film with Will Smith. Hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about there, if I'm going to keep referencing it. But this is a very interesting story because of the fact that Mark Silvestri is lending his amazing art and writing throughout this entire story, and you do get that gritty, cross-hatching, and just mysterious kind of look that his art naturally lends to characters. But I think it beautifully achieves that level of feeling when it pertains to Batman and Joker. The Joker is creepy yet funny at the same time. Batman is mysterious and brutal, and like I said, the main villain has a lot of I Am Legend tropes and similarities to not only the main villain, but the henchmen of the main villain as well, which are almost zombie-like vampires as well. So definitely some really good stuff here. This is a more modern release, which I think it came out maybe even this year in singles, but really good stuff. Highly recommend it. Beautiful artwork and interesting story. But that does wrap up Batman and the Joker, the Deadly Duo, and we can jump to the next Marvel Comics entry. Now I can finally include this on the list, which is none other than Marvel Zombies, the Omnibus. This is included on the list probably for obvious reasons at this point. Throughout this entire story, you're going to see all of the superheroes of the Marvel Universe. Maybe all. Again, we're going to tread lightly. Maybe all of the superheroes and villains of the Marvel Universe become zombies, get zombified, if you will. Where the story goes from there, who knows? You guys will have to read to find out. But obviously, throughout this book, you're going to get everything that comes along with zombies, which is going to be blood and gore, body horror, a lot of just brutal panels. But on top of that, you're also going to have a lot of the superhero and villain Marvel community that we all know and love, using their powers in some very disturbing ways and brutal ways as well, because obviously with them being zombified, they don't exactly hold back when it pertains to obtaining their next meal. There is a catch to that, which I won't allude to because I think it's a beautiful, beautiful touch to the classical zombie, if you will. So I do recommend this. I do not think you should go into it expecting critically acclaimed work, but it is a lot of fun. It definitely ticks the boxes as far as spooky reading and brutal reading. So I highly recommend this, especially for the month of October. but that does wrap up Marvel Zombies. So let's jump to the final DC Comics entry. I had to adjust the camera because these next two books are just that big, but the last entry for DC Comics is Blackest Night. This is an event that takes place during the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run. There is obviously some connections to that run and characters that appear during that run and throughout Green Lantern's lore. But on the ground level, this is essentially a zombie outbreak that is taking place in the DC universe. You get to see a lot of reanimated characters you may know or love. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have no clue who they are, but they do become reanimated and attack the living. And this also has a rare instance where I do feel like the tie-ins for this specific event are pretty essential and some interesting stuff because you get to see how all of the members of the DC universe are reacting to this super powered zombie outbreak essentially, and you really get to see them come face to face with their reanimated friends, family members, loved ones, or maybe even just super powered colleagues. And it's a very interesting way to explore this world that is facing a borderline zombie outbreak. There's so many just brutal and insane deaths and panels throughout this entire event. It definitely ticks the boxes as something you want to read in October. I'm a huge zombie fan, so I've always loved this event just because it's pretty much deceased before we ever even got deceased. But there are some connections to Green Lantern and the emotional spectrum and everything like that with Necron. But on the ground level, it's some brutal stuff, it's some spooky stuff, and it's very interesting to see the DC world and its characters get faced with a zombie apocalypse essentially, but in canon where deceased isn't. So, highly recommend this. Such a good event. If you're a zombie fan like me, you're probably going to love it just as much as I did. But that does wrap up Blackest Night, so let's jump to the final Marvel Comics entry. Last but not least for Marvel Comics, a lot of you probably saw this coming. Immortal Hulk by Al Ewing and Joe Bennett. This is a horror comic before it's even a Hulk comic, in my opinion. But you do have a lot of Hulk's lore being paid homage to. You have a lot of interesting concepts being brought up for the first time and explored. It lends beautifully to veteran readers and new readers at the same time. This is such a great book to read during October. I cannot recommend it enough. The imagery throughout, especially Hulk's transformation specifically, are creepy. There's body horror, there's gore, blood, there's aliens, there's other monsters that make an appearance and come face to face with Hulk or help Hulk. There is just so much or so many aspects of the horror world that find their way in this book and make an appearance in this book. Sometimes big, sometimes small, but it is such a great read as well. This is an essential Marvel read in general, whether it's October or not. But I do think reading this during October would be completely and totally fitting because it is just that much of a horror-centric book that just happens to feature the Hulk and be about the Hulk. But highly recommend it. Do yourself a favor and read it in any format, whether it's the omnibus, hardcovers, digitally. This is the book you're going to want to read during October. And I honestly would probably say this is my favorite Hulk run ever as well. So there's a little bonus there also. But that does wrap up Immortal Hulk from Marvel. So that does wrap up today's list. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I truly appreciate each and every one of you guys. As always, I'm going to ask you all to add to my list, of course. Comment down below. Let me know what capes and crusaders and cowls and superhero-focused horror stories you guys happen to love the most, you guys enjoy the most. Obviously, that's a very specific list that I did here, and I'm asking you guys to contribute to. But hopefully we're going to be doing this for a lot of years, and we got to change up the topic every October. So here we are, making it even more specific to make the listing even harder for us as fans. So comment down below, add to the list, let me know what you guys love that is horror-centric from Marvel and DC. But If you guys have enjoyed this and you're not a part of the Illuminati, hit that subscribe button. And if you could do me a favor and hit that thumbs up icon, it really means a lot to us on the channel and it really helps with the algorithm. And if you did enjoy today's video and you want to get notifications anytime we post content, then hit that bell icon. That way you can get notifications anytime a short or video is posted. But thank you so much for watching. As always, make sure to stay spooky this October. And of course, as always, stay nerdy.